Monsteras are the it houseplant. Who doesn't want one? But what if you could have as many Monsteras as you wanted to add to your collection, or a bunch to give to your friends? Well, you can. All you need is one to start with. And in this video, I'm going to share with you step by step 2 super easy proven ways that I propagate this beautiful houseplant that everyone wants in their homes. We're going to cover water propagation and how to step up your water propagated cutting to soil so that it thrives every time. We'll cover soil propagation and a special hack I do to get them to root. And also stick around till the end because I'm going to answer some of the most commonly asked questions everyone wants to know when propagating their Monsteras. So get ready, give this video a like, and let's get propagating. The first method we're going over is water propagation. And if you've seen one of my more recent videos in which I had to repot one of my Monsteras, in it I removed several cuttings during the process because I was looking to end up with a finished Monstera that only had 3 stems in it. And those are the cuttings I'll be using in this video. So to start with water propagation, the first thing we do is sterilize our pruners or blades with rubbing alcohol to prevent the spread of disease. This is a step that sometimes can be a hassle for some of us that just want to get the job done, me included, but this is one of those things you might get away with for a while, and then one day it infects the plant you love the most. So just do it, it only takes a second. Now let's go to our Monstera cuttings and look at them to determine how we'll prepare it. We see they have leaves, petioles, the stem, and nodes. These were taken from a smaller Monstera, but it works the same with a larger one. So when we look to make our cut on our Monsteras, regardless if we're doing a single node or multiple node cuttings, we're going to make our cut between 2 nodes in the center. Right here would be a great spot. But before we cut, let's look closely at the stem, and sometimes you might get lucky and have a small root poking out, which means the chances of your cutting surviving are higher. So just make sure not to cut into this root. In this case, all my cuttings are growing tips. So I made a cut towards the bottom of my cuttings between 2 nodes and left the growing points intact so they could continue to grow. And now that we've made these cuts, all that's left to do is fill a jar with room temperature water and place the Monstera cuttings inside. From this point, I like to put my Monsteras under my grow lights in my growing area, where they can get plenty of high and direct light, which will help with their development. During these next couple weeks, I'll top off my Monstera every 4 to 5 days if the water's clear, or do a complete water change if it gets too murky. Once I start to see roots appear, I'll grab my general houseplant fertilizer, mix it at half rate, and use it to fill the container every time I water. After about 3 weeks, we'll start to see that the cuttings are all rooted and healthy. The leaves have struggled a bit, but don't worry, the plants will bounce back. It's just a little shock from being taken from the mother plant and being without roots for a while. Okay, so now that we've gotten our Monsteras to this point, we can leave it here and continue to grow it in this container, but that sets limitations on how big we can grow it. Or we can step up our Monstera to soil. And that's our plan. So let's prepare by mixing some soil for this step up. I'll start by grabbing some perlite to help provide the soil mix with drainage. And let me geek out here for a minute and tell you what perlite is. Perlite is made from expanded volcanic glass that's heated to a high temperature until it pops and becomes lightweight, white, and granular like you see here. If you have plants, I suggest getting familiar with it because it helps provide aeration and drainage to our plants. The one thing I do recommend when handling it is to water it before moving it around too much to prevent the dust from going everywhere. To do this, I get a pot and scoop some up, place it in a bowl or under the sink, and water from above so the perlite is moist and the dust stays put. Now for our second component for our soil mix, we'll be using coconut coir. We're using the coir so that our soil can hold on to the water we add to it, which in a minute you'll see will be even more important when we first step up our water propagated cutting to soil. Again, let's geek out for a second time so I can tell you what coir is. And it's basically the fibrous material found between the hard internal shell and outer coat of a coconut. Once it's collected, this natural fiber undergoes a process and we get what you see here. Okay, so now back to our Monstera. Take the coir and we're going to mix it with the perlite at 2 parts coir to 1 part perlite. And we end up with a nice clean mix like this. Let's grab a pot that's not too big, but one that'll hold the roots of our 3 cuttings in a line. Fill the pot with a little soil on the bottom, and now we'll place our cuttings in the pot. I'm looking to have them evenly spread apart in a row so that when they grow, I can train them in that formation with the front of the Monstera cuttings facing forward. If you want more information about the front and the back of the Monstera, you can see more in the video I spoke about earlier. I'll put a link in the description and put it on on my end screen at the end of this video so you can watch when we're done with this one. Now that our tiny monsteras are in place, let's add soil all around, making sure not to plant our cuttings too deep, but not so shallow that the roots are exposed or the cuttings fall over. And once our pot is full, slightly compact the soil. Now, our soil was slightly moist because we wet the perlite and the core was also moist, but we just took a water propagated cutting from water to soil, so we need to give it time to acclimate to the soil's drier conditions, and we do this by keeping the soil very moist for the first 2 weeks after transplant. And then we slowly start to back off the water over the following 2 to 3 weeks until we get it to the point where we're watering when the soil is 50% dry. And the transparent pots help with that. And that brings me to the sponsor of this video, which is me, Monstera Farm. Check out my clear pots on my website. They're strong, sturdy, and clear. What a lame sales pitch. I'll put a link in the description. Thanks for the support ahead of time. Now that our monsteras are planted, let's once again put them in bright and direct light so they can continue to grow. Okay, so now let's talk about soil propagation, which provides us with a few benefits over water propagation. One being that we get the cuttings straight to soil and skip a few steps. And the most important being that it allows us to skip the step of acclimating a water-rooted cutting to soil, which can be a little challenging. That being said, I do both. Just because sometimes I don't have the time to mix the soil, so in the water they go until I have some time. And I water propagate sometimes because who doesn't want the satisfaction of watching the roots grow? Anyways, to propagate your monstera in soil, it's simple. We prepare our cuttings like we did previously by making a cut between 2 nodes. We then take the same 2 parts core, 1 part perlite mix we talked about before and fill a pot. Slightly compact the soil and with a dowel poke a hole in the soil. Then we take our cutting and place it in the hole, slightly compacting the soil all around so it doesn't fall over. If your cutting has roots, try to make a bigger hole so you don't break the roots. Now here's that hack I was telling you about before, and that is to place a small plastic or glass dome over the plant to help maintain a higher, more consistent level of humidity. In this case, the dome I have isn't tall enough to cover my plants without crushing them, but no worries. I'll put them in this makeshift greenhouse that I made from an old ecosystem. If you use this hack, be sure to take them out or open the doors for fresh air about every 2 to 3 days for about 5 to 10 minutes to prevent mold from forming. And if your cutting already has a root like this, then you can skip this step since it'll be that much easier for a successful propagation. But if not, this simple step does help increase your chances. During the next couple weeks, we'll water when the soil is about 25% dry. And in a couple weeks when the cutting is rooted, we can take it out of the greenhouse and continue to water when the soil is 50% dry. Okay, so now we're propagated, and here are the answers to the top questions I get most about Monstera propagation. When is my Monstera water propagated cutting ready for soil? I like to do so when the roots are about 1 to 2 inches long. For me, I've found that this reduces the chances of the plant going into shock by going from water to soil. How long does it take for a Monstera cutting to root? A water propagated cutting tends to put out roots faster than one propagated in soil, but depending on the environment, you should start to see roots within 1 to 2 weeks, sometime sooner. What fertilizer do you recommend for these propagated monsteras? At the time of this recording, I'm using Foliage Pro as a liquid feed at half rate, which is a general purpose houseplant fertilizer and contains macro and micronutrients that the plant needs to develop. So I recommend you look for something similar. And when my plants are a little more established, I'm also adding controlled release fertilizer at a low rate to provide a base feeding program for the plant. And in addition to this, I also recommend you leach the soil of your indoor houseplants at least once every 2 months. Now you're ready to grow all the monsteras you want. But don't forget to watch the video I mentioned before by clicking here to learn more about your monstera.